about this one feature and then it leads you to something else,
Hassan,
right? Go ahead. Go ahead.
before
Go ahead.
you, would you please do a quick introduction, repeat what you said yesterday?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So Mike, I just wanted you're probably aware of some of this, there's a huge interest out there in OData, right? Like for instance, like just a couple of days ago, I went ahead and I took Sam's release candidate, version of OData 8, right? And I went out there and I said, hey, I'm gonna go and just tell the people about, this experimental version that we can play around with. And the amount of interest that I've received, like even it broke Google predictions. You see, this gray line
Oh,
here.
fantastic.
Yeah, it just broke Google prediction. Like I just published it like literally 24 hours ago, and people have already consumed the same material for 77.2 hours worth of people watching, OData and learning about it. In addition to all the questions that comes in from people about, oh, I never heard about this. I always get this reaction. I hear people saying, I never heard about this before. What is
Mhm.
this? What is this OData thing? So there's again, I think, there's a couple of things that I'm trying to hopefully kind of influence and help, with OData. Number one thing is actually bring awareness to it, right? There isn't a lot of people that are aware of OData. The beautiful
Mhm.
thing about OData is that it's been around for so long. It's embedded in some of the most critical businesses around the world. SAP has it, SharePoint, Xbox is using it, MS Dynamics. It's all over the place and enterprise level. I'm trying to just bring OData mainstream. You know what I mean, Mike? Like
Mhm.
there's a lot of, the little guy that is building a quick calculator app. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because that little guy happens to be also at the beginning or the seed of a startup. And that startup is about to go and, build the next big thing, the next, search engine, the next social network platform, the next whatever it may be. And bringing awareness to OData, especially for people who are big fans of ASP.NET, C Sharp, the entire Microsoft ecosystem, something like this could save days and days and days in development, right? And I'm not just saying this off the bat. I just released an insider trading compliance platform end to end, built from scratch. It heavily relies on OData, and it just saved us a lot of time and effort. And I want to kind of bring this awareness. But in addition to that, you probably know this. It's been like 2 or 3 years now. I've been very heavily engaged with social networks and working with people and actually embedding it in my own open source external and internal Microsoft projects, and you run into issues and you start forming some patterns, right? And these patterns, the things that you think is going to take OData to the next level. And this is where, I was just sitting with Sam yesterday. I think it was yesterday or the day before, and I was telling him, hey, I'm trying to embed OData into my system and all that, and I have a couple of ideas. Maybe we can work together and make this happen. I'm willing to put in the time and effort to make actually something like this come to reality. And that brings us to this point here, Mike, the point of, you know, reconceptualizing OData so it can adapt to newer challenges in our tech industry today, right? Like I look at competitors and other languages that offer or other technologies and frameworks that offer the same querying capability over REST, right? And I'm thinking, oh, data is really powerful. It could do that stuff and more, right? Especially with batching and the select, you're formatting the data and you're shaping the data and all that. We can take that to the next level if we kind of influence the next version of OData to have these three concepts. I don't know if you had the time to take a look, but I'll go through them real quick. We basically want to allow OData to be transient. Basically, in terms of if I have API X and you have API Y, I want my query to go through X to Y. Today, that transcendence is not there, right? You just put it on the controller, and if you're feeding that data from another API, it becomes a little bit challenging to pass that through to the next level.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And then there's also the modularization. I want people to be able to go and say, hey, I know you have select, you have filter, you have order by. I want to add a new extension that adds a new capability. Like, for instance, you have filter. name equal, Mike. I want someone to be able to go and publish a NuGet package that say, here's a new extension that will say sounds like Mike. And I want someone else to go in and publish a new extension that says, the reverse of Mike. Whatever functionality people want to type in, and they want to publish it as a module, to embed that in the new OData system, and it actually works. So we're still compliant and to the standard, to the protocol, but we're open for extension. We're open for people to come in and say, hey, I want to add this new functionality. I want to add
Mhm.
this new capability. And that helps a lot because here's the thing, Mike, to be honest with you, we can build frameworks day in and day out. It doesn't become useful until the rubber hits the road. And then this is where you run into this one enterprise or one startup or one company that says, I need this feature. This could save me months and months and months of investment. If I could just build a module that I can embed it in my APIs, my OData enabled APIs to actually run that kind of capability. That would save me a lot of time. So this is the modularization part. You're opening OData for people to be able, you're basically turning OData into a marketplace, right? A marketplace of modules. And people go build their own modules and they offer their own capability in addition to the native ones that come shipped in out of the box with OData that is coherent and compliant with the protocol. And then the last one, is the you have the technology agnosticness. I want to make OData not REST specific, and that one is a little crazy. I understand. You're probably smiling right now, saying, "What is this guy talking about?" But I just think that if I want to run a console application and I want to pass my queries through an argument, as an input, whether my technology is REST API or GPRC or WCF, whatever the case may be, whatever is in the future, I want to make it technology agnostic in terms of not having to have people, be tied to a particular protocol of communication and let it be in the open. So whatever your protocol of communication is, it doesn't matter. You can still leverage OData to kind of execute that kind of capability, and run these queries without any issues. Trying to bring its, I know that some of these requirements, requires a lot of deeper thoughts, and I have some thoughts about around most of these, but I'll let you I'll let you tell me what you think about all of these. What do you think?
I think it sounds very interesting. I, I think to really understand it, we're going to have to play around with it a little bit. So for things like technology agnostic, as you say, REST is pretty core to the OData protocol today. Now that doesn't mean certain aspects of the protocol aren't reusable, right? So you could certainly reuse the JSON format as a interoperable way to annotate the JSON and describe the objects in the payload. You could reuse the query syntax. You can reapply a lot of the same semantics and so forth. But I'm not sure when you talk about something like gRPC, are you thinking about basically tunneling
Yeah.
through gRPC, which I think makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And
Well,
we have done some
uh-huh.
explorations with various different interactions between things like gRPC and OData.
Yep, yep, yep. And that's just a manifestation of it. The ultimate goal is to make it agnostic so we can be ready for the future. Survival is not really when it comes to technology, survival is not really for the strongest or the smartest technology. It's for the technologies that have the highest level of adaptability. They can adapt, they can adjust themselves, they're fluid enough to be able to fit anywhere. You know how Bruce Lee says, if you put the water in the cup, it becomes the cup. You put the water in whatever, it becomes whatever shape it is. I want OData to be that kind of thing, to be the kind of, technology that it doesn't really matter. It's not really tied to REST because if REST goes away, and eventually it will. Mike, you and I have been in this industry,
Yep.
probably Sam too. You've been in the industry long enough, to see how things shift. Mike, do you remember there was a point in time where people said there will be nothing after WCF? TCP communication is the big thing, and nothing is going to happen after that. I remember even from an architecture standpoint, I remember there was a time where people said, everything is going to be a monolith. There will be no other approach. And then microservices came up, and then people said, okay, microservices is the one. That's it. And then serverless architecture came up. So things change. If you look at the pattern, there was someone who said, people will never need another programming language after COBOL. It will never need a program by the year 2000. People are still going to be using COBOL. Well, some people are still using COBOL, but it's not the language that everyone is using. So we know technology is changing. We know the future is changing, and there is something there about OData that is agnostic enough that it shouldn't be necessarily tied to a particular technology. And that's the challenge. This is the thing, Mike. There is there's capabilities that we know is going to live, like C sharp. Take C sharp as a language, as a technology, as a framework, with the .NET, with the ecosystem that comes with it. It lived through all of these different permutations of technology throughout the years, since the year 2000, 2001 until today. C sharp lived with ASP and then ASP.NET, and then lived through, and now it's going through Blazor. And it lived through WCF. It lived through REST, and it's now trying to kind of touch with GPRC, a little bit with cautious, and
Mhm.
and that's what we're trying to do with OData. I'm trying to make the framework. I'm trying to make the technology itself, um, fluid enough to be fitting within whatever protocol you want to use. So I understand, you're basically saying we need to explore each and every one of these. But let me ask you this. What do you think about the transcendence aspect of it? This is a problem that a lot of people are seeing today. They say, hey, I have two APIs, and one of them is, one of them has the storage, have access to the storage, especially in microservice architecture. If you have a gatekeeper, in front of your architecture, that basically prevents, it's basically the one that's allowing the communication coming in and out, and it's sitting behind another microservice that enables OData. You don't get that nice iQueryable execute on the server kind of capability through REST today.
Right.
And I
No,
think,
no, and
go ahead.
and I think this is a very interesting scenario.
Yeah.
And it's one that we've done some work to try to enable, but we've talked since the very early days about OData on top of OData as being kind of uh, the perfect um, test case for are
Hmm.
we really composable?
Hmm.
Um, and we're not there yet. So I think this idea is very interesting.
Absolutely. And I also played with it a little bit. I built this little kind of experimental library. I called it Restful Link, where you have an iQueryable async type, and that iQueryable async basically pushes through your query to the next API, and your API basically uses C sharp generation, code generation, so it basically executes, takes whatever you're passing through the wire, and tries to execute that on an iQueryable. I have a little demo here for um, just for you to take a look at, and I also have a step-by-step walkthrough. I published the library just so people could play around with it, but in general this is Restful Sense. Just a second, there's Restful Link. And Restful Link basically goes and says, and I know there has been other attempts, to do that. Like there's been other attempts. So this client in here, this is your Restful client, right? And you have this new type called link queryable, right? And you're basically, this link queryable is really a RESTful client. And when you're passing in, let's say you're doing a where, right, like this, it takes that where and tries to stringify and pass it over the wire. Ideally, OData would take that query, and pass it through the wire to the next API. And now your next API knows what to do with it without having to worry about understanding any protocols. Like for a C sharp .NET developer, for all that they know is that they're exposing an iQueryable, right? But that iQueryable actually is too smart that when it's passed to a particular RESTful client, it could take that and turn it into something that can execute on the next client and the next client. This is, Mike, this is huge for microservices. Huge for microservices, especially for people that don't want to expose OData immediately off of their existing microservice. They want to expose it through some other layer, right? But they still want the magic and the logic and the intelligence to live on some internal microservice that lives behind the scenes, behind a gatekeeper or something like that. So this is my attempt. Ideally, you go and say, let me show you here real quick. Ideally, you basically go and say something to the effect of, Just a second there, here. If you go into, here's a quick live demo there. If I go out like this and say, this is my query. So check this out. I'm basically saying I want a list of cities where the city name is Redmond and where the state is Washington to list async. And what it's basically doing, it's going and sending that query over the wire to another API. And then the other API picks up that query and executes it. So while the client looks like it's the client is doing the query on a list, it's actually running on another API completely separate from the actual client that's making the call. What do you think about that?
So what's going over the wire?
So I'm basically passing in the actual. I mean, ideally, I would want to pass iQuery, but the query of iQueryable, but I'm passing the actual iQueryable query that I'm passing in there. So I'm basically passing in here. Let me show you. Do you see this statement? Select city to city name. That's what's actually going over the wire, and then it
The
lands.
expression tree or
Yeah, the expression tree
okay.
as a string, which is dangerous. I understand. This is why we need protocols and stuff like that. But if I just go back a little bit further in here, I could show you real quick in here the what it looks like on. So check this out. I'm basically typing in here a link query, right? And I'm going and saying select city equals city name, and it's executing on the server. How it's doing that? It's basically picking up that code and using code generation and executing that on an iQueryable that the controller is exposing. Do you know what I'm saying?
I think so.
Ideally, it would be an OData query that goes in here, right? And that OData query that would go in here, it would basically be, something to the effect of, let me show you here the service. This is LinkedIn service. This is really what it's doing. See, this is C# script run async. It takes on your stringified query, and then it runs it against whatever data source you're passing in.
Mhm.
So that data source could be an iQueryable on the server. Your API is passing in that query, and it has the least amount of footprint you can think of. It's really simple code. That's it. That's all the magic. That's it. That there is. You're passing in an iQueryable over the wire as a URL query, and it's executing that against whatever data source you have, which means that in your source code, all you really would need to do is this guy. Check this out. This is real quick in here. Let me go back to this guy here. So this is this guy, and then I want the demo. It would be student async. I do talk a lot. It's a problem, Mike. I do have a lot of stuff over there, but I hope I can I can find this demo real quick. So this is via demo, dynamic component, hidden API, school X. It's somewhere, it's basically I can view it in here. Basically on the controller itself, if I go back step a little bit in here. This is my controller. This is all I'm doing on my controller, Mike. I'm basically going and saying, hey, define this data source. And through that controller, when you receive that link query, take that link query and execute. And what Restful link service would do is that it would take that link query and execute that on whatever iQueryable you're getting from your database, basically.
I see. So you're basically just serializing the link query
Into an expression tree. Yep.
into an
Yep.
expression passed in the URL and then applying that to the link
To
on
the
the other
data
side.
source. Yes, exactly. So this something like this could guarantee the transcendence aspect of communication, especially for microservices. But it can be groomed a little bit, Mike. We can leverage existing protocols like OData to kind of execute something like that. I have a prototype, it works, but of course, passing in just a link query over the wire is a huge security issue. Anybody could write anything in there. I could I could literally pass in there, an infinite loop, inside of a scoped, query, and it could just keep the server. I could DDoS a server like that or an API like that in a second, right? But if we're following an existing protocol like OData, and we can turn that protocol into an iQueryable expression tree, and I can pass that through the wire to another service and another service downstream, that's magic. That's big. That's big for a lot of people. Today, people have to build shims and, build, a little bit front ends in front of their existing OData services, because they can expose it. They can pull it out of the, and then again, to be honest with you, I think OData today is like what, 13 or 14 years old, right? So that was technically pre-microservices, pre-serverless era. It's understandable that it's trying to expose things off the bat and it's not thinking about the next layer, right? But now I think if we think about transcendence like this, we can take it to that level. Like with this mindset, something like this. What do you think?
So how does this relate to kind of how, so OData today takes a URL, right, a request in a URL, and generates a link expression from that.
That's right.
Whereas this takes a serialized link expression and generates
It just
a link,
applies it
an
to the
actual
data.
link expression for
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
And today in the OData client, we take a link query and generate the OData URL from that.
That's right.
Much like this example takes a link query and generates the just simple serialization of the link expression. So are you
That's right.
thinking that that the OData URL syntax becomes your serialization format for the serializing the link across the different services?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So basically whatever you're passing through the wire, it would be easy. We should make it easy for people to go and say, here's this OData query. I can turn it into an expression tree, and I can take that expression tree and pass it down to my API clients so they can pass it to the next layer.
Mm-hmm.
See what I'm saying? So in that sense, and if you just give me a second here, I want to show you a quick and dirty kind of visualization of what I'm trying to say. I think you do get the idea, but just trying to put a visual for it. You have a gatekeeper like this on your microservices architecture. And this guy is taking care of your auth and all of that nonsense. And then you have in the back end here, this is, let's say, you have students microservice, right? And you have a client sitting behind that door here is sending you an OData query. This guy doesn't have storage or anything. It's just a kind of a relay kind of pass through, to communicate with the rest of architecture. It gives it gives engineers that kind of flexibility. If I want one day to break this into 3 different services, I don't have to break my contracts, right? So your client is going in here and saying, hey, I want to pass in an OData query. I want to be able to go and say, so this is your OData query. This guy will be able to go and say, oh, let me turn that into link expression. And then let me give that link expression to my REST client. And let me take that OData query and pass it downstream to my student's microservice. And at that level, my student microservice actually owns a resource that has storage. And that resource could actually execute that OData query downstream. And what helps with this one is that I don't even have to worry about who my client is. It could be an API, it could be a Cosmos DB, it could be a SQL, it could be whatever it could be. As long as they're exposing an iQueryable that could go through the wire, that would you think it would revolutionize the entire concept of transient kind of OData through multiple services. You could even break at this point in time, you could even break an OData query, slice it into 3 different pieces and spread it across like fan out to 3 different microservices and then pull all of that back in. Your client thinks that it's talking to one service when in reality your gatekeeper is breaking it into 3 different pieces and sending every piece to its respective microservice. Think about this from a scale perspective, from a scale standpoint. What do you think about that?
Well, this doesn't sound too different from what we do in Microsoft Graph today. right? In Microsoft Graph today, the client's going to speak to Microsoft Graph using OData, and Microsoft Graph doesn't actually have the storage for any of the data. It
That's
talks
right.
through a series of backend workload services, and so it takes and sends multiple requests at times to different backends through OData, and the workloads respond in OData, and the Microsoft Graph then combines those responses and sends them back to the client.
Okay, so we already have that transcendence, you say, like we already have that kind of capability. I wonder if it's so how do they do that without actually telling too much details because we're publishing this live, but
No,
uh,
I can share.
okay.
So the Microsoft Graph component, what we call AGS, will
Uh-huh.
take the incoming OData request, and it uses the existing open source OData libraries that we produce for .NET to parse that request.
Mm,
And based on that request, it figures out which workloads to query. And if it happens to be one workload, then it's able to optimize the path where it just forwards the query to that workload and then takes a response and directly returns the response. If it happens to touch multiple different backend workload services, then it will figure out what requests it needs to make to each of those services, and then it makes just a regular OData request to each of those services. So all of the services behind Microsoft Graph speak OData. And so it'll make the request to those services, it'll get back the data, and then if it needs to, it'll aggregate the data together, and then return that as it uses again, the OData libraries to write a OData response using the data that it has aggregated across those different workload services.
But can this query that's coming in through the wire, can it be see it brings me back to this point, taking up this query that's coming through the wire and turn it into something that I can reuse within my .NET application, as an expression tree rather than a protocol that's hard to extract the expression tree out of. You know what I'm trying to say, Mike? Like
Yeah, so
getting
that yeah, so the OData.NET library is the one that does the parsing of the URL, and it does create a expression tree. And that expression tree is what the Microsoft Graph service uses in order to parse and understand that request. And
okay.
then it uses the same OData library to build the request from an expression that it then passes down to the workloads. So, so it's using the implementation within that library to do the conversion between the OData URL syntax and in-memory abstract tree.
Gotcha. Gotcha. I see. Then the client then can just pick up that iQueryable and turn it into an OData back to an OData request. Just to visualize what I'm trying to say here. I think I know what you're trying to refer to. Um, if you if you have your controller in place, it's your API controller, and you have your service that's doing some business logic in the middle, like a business logic layer, and then you have your broker, which is just a client, right, that talks to another API. If your controller here is receiving an OData request at this point here, and it's passing it through to your logic layer, and your logic layer is basically transcending that down to a broker. It could go from this is my thought here. Now it's coming in its OData protocol format, and then your controller at this level takes that and uses OData library to turn it into an iQueryable like this. Your business logic does whatever it wants with it. Maybe it wants to add additional stuff on top of it if it needs to be. And then it hands it over to your broker, which talks to your API client. And then your broker will convert it back into an OData format that the next client, the next service or dependency could understand and consume. That's basically where my mind is right now. Do you think that's, yeah, go ahead.
Almost. So So the low-level OData libraries don't generate an iQueryable because they don't
Okay.
have the concept of a CLR types. It'll
Uh-huh.
generate just an abstract expression tree. Uh,
Uh-huh.
uh, the web API layer, as you're very familiar with,
Uh-huh.
will take incoming URL. It uses the same low-level OData library to parse that into an expression tree, and then from that expression tree, it will generate the link, the iQueryable.
That's right.
So any one of these boxes can choose either to keep to the low-level expression tree or to generate the iQueryable if what they're using actually does use an iQueryable. So in the case of Microsoft Graph, we don't generate an iQueryable. We
Mhm.
just use the abstract expression tree, which doesn't require that any CLR objects be
Yeah. Yep.
created or defined or used. It just
Mhm.
uses the generic expression tree, reasons over that expression tree, and then generates the OData URL to pass on to the next piece in the pipeline.
And how complicated is this piece? Like today, as things stand today, going from, an OData query like this raw protocol OData query to an expression tree like this. You're going over to an expression tree. So this is our tree expression
We call
for
it abstract search tree, AST,
you call it what? Infrastructure?
abstract
Oh,
search tree,
abstract tree like
search
this?
tree, abstract search tree,
Oh,
search.
search tree like this?
We call it AST.
AST, okay. So
Mm.
you go like this. How crazy is it today, you guys, to go from that to a CLR type like iQueryable?
Uh,
Because
So
that's
that
where this is. Go
so
ahead.
so that's exactly what the web API stack does, right?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
from AST to iQueryable, there's another rectangle. You can add another.
Okay.
So yeah, so the last part is iQueryable. The before iQueryable,
Uh-huh.
there's a step uh, using the AST to construct the link expression.
Construct link expression like this.
Yeah, as Mike mentioned, that this part happened in the web API,
Uh-huh.
and from audit query to AST happened in the audit lib.
Okay. So we have this piece today. We already have something out of the box with OData that basically takes that query and I can just extract a link query outside of that. This is huge. This is actually a big piece because a lot of people have asked me about that one. But let me ask you this. How about going back? Can I go back to an OData query from an iQueryable?
Yes. So that's what the OData client piece does.
Okay.
So
Okay.
in the OData client, so what typically happens is you generate the classes used by the OData client based on the metadata of your service.
Okay.
So your OData services are going to expose dollar metadata, and it's going to say there's customers and order details and so forth. So we have a first step, a design time step, that's going to generate CLR objects for those different types, your customers, orders, order details, and so forth. And then using the OData client, you'll build link queries against those objects.
Okay.
And then the OData client will take that link expression and generate the OData URL query syntax from that link expression.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, if that's I'm gonna try this a couple of times. I'm gonna take this concept here and try to make a couple of, experimentations with it just to see, Mike, just to see how I'm trying to bring this mainstream, right? So
Mhm.
I want to see if I can, just have the guy that just started C Sharp last month be able to kind of integrate with OData day one, right? That's the ease of technology. The ease of use is super important to actually bring a technology down to people to be able to use it. I want to see, I'm gonna experiment with this one, as well, and forgive my ignorance there because this is super new to me, to be able to go that full circle like that because and now I'm thinking like I had a lot of people asking me that question, like, I'm getting this query, from the URL. How can I extract an iQueryable out of it? The other thing is, so the design time step, generating contracts and all that, This one might be a little, we might need to revisit this in our next meeting, hopefully, Mike and Sam. I just want to see it, experiment with it firsthand. I'll work closely with
Hmm.
Sam to see what that looks like. And then once I have a grasp of it, maybe we could tune it a little bit if it's too many steps for just someone who just wants to pass an OData query down to the next service. What do you
Yep.
think about that,
So
Mike?
so I think what you're highlighting is that it's very possible that we have the right logic,
Yes,
but it's not factored into the right components
yeah,
that make it easy to reuse in this scenario.
exactly.
And if we can extract out those individual components in a way that make them more reusable and composable in different ways, that could be very useful. And that's certainly
Yeah.
something that we can look at doing.
Yeah, productization, Mike. Basically, you're taking it and you're making it even easier. Plug and play, right? I want a grandma in Nebraska to be able to use OData. That's the goal. So we'll see if we can make something like that happen, right? I'll experiment with a couple of these, and I'll set up another meeting. Hopefully, when Christoph comes back, we can have him join in, and we could explore the modularization piece, Mike. Once I just have a good grasp on this one, and I could have a couple of inputs just based on how easy it is. It's like you said, it's probably
Mhm.
going to end up being us just extracting these components and making them easier for people to just go in and say, oh, I have this, REST, OData, REST API client that I can pass it an iQueryable and it will just turn it to me into an OData query and vice versa.
Mhm.
Just extracting these and make them modular and make them simple, so people knows just, okay, I know what I need to do in this scenario, in this microservices architecture scenario, in these situations. I know exactly what needs to happen so I can leverage OData. The thing, Mike, is that a while back, a long time ago, and I know we have about 6 minutes, so I'm just gonna go through this real step. I'm gonna show you something real quick. A while back, I tried to take a look at what does it take actually for technologies to actually evolve and spread and people to adapt it. The adaptation is a big step when it comes to any technology out there, and I tried to kind of put a map of what happens with any technology. Just looking through, I've been in this industry for about 24 years now, so I've seen how technologies start and how they die, and what are the things that impacts a particular product. You know this. There has been things out there that everyone thought, this is gonna be the big thing. It's gonna be the ultimate thing, and then all of the sudden it didn't go through. Here it is. So let me just share this with you real quick in here. Oh, there he is. Hi, Christoph. Nice to meet you. You I recorded this session for you, so we're gonna share it with the world. This is what I saw, Mike. There's a vision, and then someone turns this vision into a product, and then there's a community adaptation. The community gets big enough that the industry starts adapting that, technology, and then there are people that just follow. They're not interested in the technology, but because the industry standard it is, they start picking that up, and then your consumers eventually pick up whatever technology. These layers that I'm going through in here is where I'm trying to take OData through. I know we have makers today. We have the engineers that build OData. We have you, and we have everybody in that community trying to have their input. There's a good community around OData, right? And then there is an industry standard, and there are people that use OData today. But this, from consumption standpoint, when I say consumers, I'm basically talking about engineers actually picking it up and saying, yeah, I'm going to use OData because it's cool and all that kind of stuff, especially in this day and age, trying to keep up with the different architecture patterns that are happening today. This is where I'm trying to drive this basically. And I think the ease of use and productization, making it plug and play, could kind of take OData up to a next level. As a technology, I think it's doing something really unique, and I think it's a very powerful technology. It just needs a little bit of you know, a
Mhm.
little bit of tuning. Do you agree? Like just a
Uh,
little bit of tuning.
yep.
Good, good. So,
Yep.
so that's that. I'll, next step for me, I will, actionable item, I will just, go through this entire process of, going from an OData query going over the wire to an iQueryable and back from an iQueryable to a client that can turn it back into an OData query to the next layer of services to actually pick it up and process it, and I'll just take my notes. And then for our next meeting, hopefully when Christoph comes back, I will, I will share my notes and I will share some thoughts about how we can simplify this, Mike. Just make it really simple and easy that anyone can just pick it up and run with it. What do you think about that?
That sounds great.
All right, Sam. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead. You were going to say
Yes,
something.
that's good.
All right.
I'm
All
looking
right.
forward to the next meeting.
Awesome, awesome, and hopefully you guys, once we get to the modularization point, just allowing people to just go in and publish their own NuGet library, and all of a sudden you have sounds like, and you have compare, and you have calculate, and all that kind of stuff. I think people would be really psyched about that. Especially like we guaranteed that the transcendence piece. Okay, you can pass it through to any service you want downstream. Now you can even build your own modules and execute your own functions through OData, while being coherent to the protocol. I think that would be kind of a big deal. Anyways, thank you guys so much. Christoph, feel free to go through the recording. Please, watch the recording, and if you have any comments or concerns, or you have any input to the matter, I'm really excited to work with you guys to kind of just see how we can, as a community, kind of bring this kind of new mindset and new tuning kind of to the technology. Okay. Cool.
That sounds great. Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate all of your excitement and your driving this, and looking
Absolutely.
forward to the follow-up.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. You have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you later. Bye. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.